Hola, in this video we're going to talk about the numbers 100 all the way up to a trillion in Spanish. So first we have ciento, or if you use this number in front of anything else, then it becomes cien. So ciento is the number 100 all by itself, but when you count anything, including other types of numbers, then it becomes cien, as in cien lápices. And if you do anything other than just 100, so for example 105, you simply add the other numbers onto the end of it. And in those cases you use the ciento form of 100, so ciento cinco, ciento sesenta y siete. And so in this example you can see that you just take them one by one. So 167, the 1 turns into ciento for the 100, plus 60, sesenta, plus 7, siete. Right, then the rest of the sets of hundreds mostly follow a pattern where you say the first number, and then dos, and then cientos. Right, so you can take the word for 200, doscientos, to mean 200s. Trescientos, cuatrocientos. Now with 500, it doesn't follow that pattern exactly. It's similar, but it is irregular. So you say quinientos, quinientos. Seiscientos, setecientos. Almost completely follows that pattern, but instead of saying siete, it's sete, setecientos. Ochocientos, novecientos, again very similar but slightly different. Un mil, that is how you say 1,000 in Spanish. Now notice up here I used a period rather than a comma. In most countries where they speak Spanish, when you use larger numbers to separate the values, you actually use a period. Now if you want to say quite large numbers, that have thousands in them, you just say how many thousands there are. So you have 17,000, meaning 17,000. 17,592. So again, you just follow down with each set of numbers and add them together. The only time you use E is between a tens and a ones column, though. So you do not say 592. You just use the E between the 90 y dos. Cien mil, just to show you that you do use the form of 100 cien when it comes in front of other numbers. So if you say 100,000, well, technically you're counting the thousands, so you use cien as opposed to ciento. Cien mil, 100,000. Here we have the word for a million, un millón. Notice again that we use the periods as opposed to the commas in Spanish. Now I have this day at the end. Anytime that you are counting objects or even other numbers, the day is necessary. So if you want to say a million people, un millón de personas, you have to use that day, a million of people. Otherwise, the number by itself is un millón. Okay. Dos millones de. So if you want to say 2 million people, dos millones de personas. You notice that the accent disappears. That's because we now added an S to the end of it. The way that accents work, we don't need them in this case. But literally, we're saying 2 millions of something. All right. Now this is where it gets a little bit different. And these very large numbers actually are used a lot in Spanish, just due to the way that a lot of prices in other countries are higher because their currency is worth less. Now in English, for this number, we say 1 billion, but in Spanish, we say 1,000 millions, mil millones de. So if you want to say $1 billion, mil millones de dólares. And this is where it again gets confusing. To say a trillion, as we do in Spanish, we say a trillion in English. In Spanish, we would say un billón de. So if you want to say $1 trillion, un billón de dólares. So this does not mean a billion. This means 1 trillion. All right, so let's do a little bit of practice. What I want you to do is to write these numbers completely out in Spanish. Now go ahead and press pause. That way you can take a little bit of time, and I'll come back in a moment and tell you the answers. And just note letter D here should have an extra zero at the end. You can kind of see it at the bottom. Right, but that is $17 trillion. So how would you say that? Okay, press pause, and we'll come back in a second. All right, so we'll go over the answers now. Letra A, 357. Remember that the numbers just kind of carry down place by place. Letra B, 31,200. And so in this case, you say 31,000 and then the 200. Now notice that it's 31,000 instead of 31 because mil is a masculine word, so it uses un. Letra C, 50 millones de personas. So remember that when you use any word that ends in either millones or billones, you have to use that preposition de at the end of it. Letra D, 17 billones de dólares. Now, even though this is 17 trillion in English, in Spanish we say 17 billones de dólares.